Hello YouTube, welcome to the salty Artillerist here. We are going to have a look at something called Tank Overhaul Episode 7, Elefant, referring to the German Panzerjäger, Elefant, or Ferdinand, depending on if you are before or after the reincarnation and updates of it. So my first impression of these videos are they always get the facts wrong, they are really just gliding on skates, they get caught in the details, and they actually do a kind of a poor job sometimes. And that might actually trigger some people out there, especially in modern times. However, the video we're going to look now is currently 12 years old, but it was uploaded recently. And well, 10 years ago I don't think there was as much enthusiastic thinking about tanks, at least not on the same level, judging by the fact that World of Tanks, War Thunder and all the other crappy games out there exist now. They didn't back then. So, without further ado, let's have a look at this. This, by the way, I don't know if it matters, but apparently it does for some people. This video is from Canada, or at least the tank program is from Canada. Let's have a look at it, shall we?
Battered, bruised, beat up. This rusted hulk is a veteran of the greatest tank fight of all time, the Battle of Kursk.
It's called Kursk. It shouldn't be hard to say. Kursk. Cursed. It's not cursed, it's Kursk.
Meet the ferocious German-built Elefant, later salvaged from the...
Okay, here we have all the informations. First part is the gun that we see, okay. Formerly Ferdinand. Yes. Did anyone else than me fail to read that in the flick of a second that it was actually there?
Meet the ferocious German-built Elefant, later salvaged from the bloody Italian campaign at Anzio, then almost left behind in history's garbage can.
I don't think the Elefant, the Tiger P, or the Ferdinand will ever be forgotten because they are such a huge failures in military history. But sure, let's go ahead.
So rare, no tank collector will ever own one. No matter.
Well, there was never made more than, is it 92 of them? Either 91 or 92 of them, and they were made on a fucking mistake, so of course no one will ever get their hands on them. You shouldn't, even if you get the chance, you should never get your hands off them.
No matter how much they spend, because there's only 2 left in the entire world. Now, an American crew will bring this German war machine back to life.
This is a Canadian TV program. According to Wikipedia, this is a Canadian TV program. With an American crew. Huh, okay.
But it's going to be a tough haul.
This is the largest vehicle we've had, surely the most heaviest.
The most heaviest? Okay.
And this tank crew will learn that big machines cause big headaches.
Not my mother!
Blah 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 blah. Action over exaggeration. M4 Sherman. Yay.
On a cold spring morning at the U.S. Army Ordnance Museum in Aberdeen, Maryland, they get ready to move an elephant.
An elephant. Nice.
An elephant deep in slumber for the last 6 decades. A Second World War Panzerjäger or
Jager. Okay. Panzerjäger. Shouldn't be that hard to say. Apparently it is.
tank hunter. A machine so big, she had 2 names. First known as the Ferdinand, and then the Elefant. 65 metric tons dry.
I'm pretty sure those 65 metric tons are for the Ferdinand, while the 71 metric tons are for the Elefant version. I might be wrong on that one. Till proven differently.
71 tons when combat loaded with ammo, fuel, and oil. A devastating 88mm gun. One of the largest weapons put on any tank during this.
2 mistakes. First of all, this is not a tank. And I will leave you the details out there. Someone else can explain to you very nicely why this is not a tank. Someone can say that in the comment section below, because I don't bother with that kind of details. Second of all, if you classify this as a tank and say it has the biggest gun ever put on a tank, Well, first of all, that's a mistake because no tank. Then second of all, that would be incorrect because then I just think of the KV-II, which has a 152mm gun. But if you're referring to the longest barrel ever stuffed in a tank, then you're correct, because if I just get my handy dandy calculator here, then we know that it is an 88 flak gun with an L71 length, I believe. And that leaves us with barely 6.25 meters long barrel. So yes, the longest tank gun, no, not the biggest gun. Far from it, really. It's barely half the caliber of the biggest guns ever put on a tank. Even though it's not a tank. Next.
Second World War. One of Adolf Hitler's superweapons.
You would never ever ever in your life classify the Ferdinand as a superweapon. You would refer to it as salvage from a failed project, which cost the munitions department a lot of money, time and resources to maintain. But sure, let's call it a superweapon just because we can.
Built to win.
These were not built to win, they were built on a failed project.
This is the biggest tank that we've done so far.
It's not a tank.
Everything is twice as heavy as what we normally are working with.
You have never worked with an M1 Abraham.
She's had to wait in line while other military vehicles get brought back to their former glory. Finally, she got her turn.
What was the point of all that?
With such a massive beast, only another heavy metal monster can get it into position.
You could also just call it an armored recovery vehicle, which it is, but sure.
When they first called us to go get the Elephant tank, they needed a group effort, so we had to get recovery because we don't have the vehicles to be able to pull that type of a vehicle.
A lot of folks don't understand that ordnance encompasses not just artillery and the projectiles that come out of the artillery, but tanks, armored personnel carriers, and the fact
it includes pretty much anything. Ammunition, that only includes shells and grenades. Munition includes shells, grenades, projectiles, gunpowder, whatsoever. Ordnance includes pretty much anything that can be sent to any given location. There is probably a specification what an ordnance is, but yeah, he got it right. Nice job.
that ordnance goes back to the 14th century and even earlier.
What we've got here is just a portion of our ammo collection here at the Ordnance Museum. You can see many examples of shells dating from the 19th century up to the present day, essentially.
With the Elephant in place, the crew has a massive challenge on its hands. She is the biggest tank they've ever dealt with.
She is not a tank, but I'm glad you call it a she. All respectable machinery is referred to as a she. That also explains why sometimes it's a bitch to operate.
The plan is to remove the tracks, strip her of decades of rust, repair, repaint, and return her to a place of honor in the Ordnance Museum's static collection. And they've been given just 5 weeks to do it. Along the way, the team will discover how this tank met its end and fell to Allied hands.
It looked like a terrible mess. Parts were missing off of the deck. Sprockets were all tore up. It received a lot of battle damage. We weren't sure about anything that was going on with it. A lot of flaking, rusty paint.
The fenders themselves were literally just pieces. Somebody had made some scrap pieces and put on to simulate a fender. The road wheels seemed to be in pretty good shape, but the track was extremely rusty.
Well, fenders are just sheet metal back then, so yeah, what did you expect? They are supposed to just fall off whatever, no one cares about them.
Small wonder this Elephant looked so battle-scarred. She saw action in 2 epic battles, Anzio, Italy in 1944, and before that, the greatest tank battle of all time, the Battle of Kursk.
Define greatest. If you mean grandest, sure. Greatest, no. It was a horrible manslaughter on both sides.
The Battle of Kursk was, beyond a shadow of doubt, the largest tank battle ever. I mean, this is the quintessential tank battle this is the mother of all tank battles.
1943, the Eastern Front. 2 years after Germany invaded Russia, the two countries were locked in a death struggle. German forces had suffered their first major defeat at the nightmare of Stalingrad. Now they were regrouping for revenge. In western Russia, the city of Kursk lies at the heart of what is known as a salient, or bulge, in the Russian-German lines. The Germans were determined to break through.
The Battle of Kursk is literally the last opportunity the Germans are going to have to launch an offensive.
Well, launch an offensive on the Eastern Front, perhaps. If you just look at the Battle of the Bulge and all the other minor, major pushes they made constantly on all fronts, no, not the last.
The Germans assemble a staggering fighting force, 900,000 troops.
Actually, let me just check if I got my facts right there. If we take a look here, clearly here on the date, clearly says, well, it says that in my language, but that shouldn't really matter. Yeah, it was before the Battle of the Bulge, so no, it's not the last.
2,700 tanks. The Russians would face them with 1,300,000 troops and roughly 3,600 tanks. In the looming battle, Germany introduced a brand new superweapon, an absolutely...
A brand new superweapon? Again, this is not a superweapon. This is just a tank destroyer salvaged from a failed project. But then there's also A. Wasn't it also the first use of Tiger tanks and Panthers? I don't recall the details, but it might have been. It was definitely right around that era.
A massive tank weighing in at over 65 tons. The frontal armor, together with add-on plates, was almost 10 inches thick.
Nope. The frontal armor was 8 inches thick at best, but for people who don't like feet, it's only 200 millimeters thick. Same goes for this chest made up here on top. Get your facts right.
She carried a crew of 6, including 2 loaders to feed the thunderous 88mm gun.
The Elephant was also supposed to be one of these sort of wonder weapons that would defeat Soviet armor from a distance. It's KWK-43.
My ears! It didn't have a KVK. It had a PAK 43-1. If it was an assault gun, it would have a Stuk 43-1. The KVK is for the Tiger-II only. And most likely also some of all the Waffenträgers, but those would also either be PAKs and Stuks versions. It did not have a KVK, it had a PAK.
Main gun, which fired this enormous round at enormous velocity with a penetration of over 7 inches or so. Easily defeat any Allied tank in World War II with firing this round.
It actually had problems with dealing with the IS-2 within 600 meters, if I'm not mistaken.
Basically, the 88 shell would go right through a Sherman's armor plate.
So would the short version of the 88, but now I say short, I still mean an 88 L56, not the 88 L71. I wouldn't really call that short either, but you get the point.
You could knock out a Russian tank at 2,000 meters with this.
Yeah, if you hit it at 2,000 meters. Good luck with that.
The team's first assignment in the Elephant restoration is to remove the set of tracks. None of it is going to be easy.
You look at the track, you think, oh, I'll just move that. And you don't move anything by, just by hand.
That's how tanks are. They're too big to operate by hand.
One of the basic challenges of this German Elephant tank was the weight and size of the vehicle. Usually when we work on a tank, we're able to move it in and out of the booth, especially when we're putting on tracks. This German Elephant, we had to make one move into the booth, and that's where it stayed.
There's no Elephant manual or guidebook to follow. They've got to rely on their experience, guesswork, and luck.
Well, judging by the fact that this is a 60-year-old machinery, it should not be as complicated as a modern battle tank, so it shouldn't be that hard.
This vehicle here is so large and big that it's going to be very difficult to take the track off. For one thing, we don't know how it comes off. We don't know how the slack adjusters work, if it even has any at all. To be able to lift it up in the air, I'm not sure what's going to happen, what size jacks I'm going to need, how I'm going to have to crib it up.
At this early stage, they're going to use a rivet buster to force the pins out of the track. Coming up, Jerry and his guys find out the hard way what 6 decades of rust does to a tank track.
You know, if you couldn't get it off with a goddamn rivet buster, what the hell makes you think you can get it out with a fucking mallet and a crowbar?
At the U.S. Army Ordnance Museum in Aberdeen, Maryland, this crew is restoring an almost extinct specimen, the German-built Elephant. Only about 90 of them were ever produced. Now, only 2 are thought to be in existence.
Last time you could confirm only 2 were in existence. Now you say are thought to be in existence. Thanks for the heads up. You are lying to me.
One in Russia, and this Elephant right here.
You don't run across a job like this very often.
After a lot of hammering and sweat, Joe and his team are still trying to knock out the first track pin. As sometimes happens, the guys don't have the tool they need, so they make one up.
You take some of these vehicles, they're so old, you'll never find the parts for them. They're like the tools to take off the wheels. So you have to do a lot of measuring and make the tools. All the special tools that we have been made. You can't...
We have been made. I love that dialect. I speak like this.
We cone the end of it, put a divot in the end of it, so it'll align on the tin here, keep it centered as it drives through there. And that way, you know, it stays centered, it doesn't go off the track when it's driving through the pin.
They're not sure the rod will work, but they're running out of options that won't wreck the track. Remember, this Elefant doesn't come with any spare parts.
That was the general problem with the Elefants. They never came with spare parts.
Feel that, right, Leroy?
The Elefant came into being by chance, and it began life with a different name.
Here we might actually get the idea and the background story of this machinery. That should be so interesting.
It wasn't designed from the outset as a heavy tank destroyer. The Germans had tried to develop a new heavy tank, the Tiger, and had two competitive designs.
One of the designs was produced by automotive engineer Ferdinand Porsche. His design did not win, but he had already manufactured some 90 chassis. In the middle of a world war, these were too precious to waste.
They ended up with several of these hulls and said, well, we can't do anything with them. And Porsche said, well, you could stick an 88mm gun and turn it into a gigantic heavy tank destroyer.
Not exactly, but sure, I'll take your word for it. It was always supposed to field the 88 gun, but okay.
And that's where it came from.
In honor of her designer, the new tank destroyer was officially called the Ferdinand.
Yeah, what a legacy to have, isn't it? You made a huge mistake, and here you have your project, eternally named after you.
She must have seemed indestructible.
So that's what, a good 8 inches, I should think. 8 inches of armor, that's proof against most anything.
See, he got it right. That's amazing.
The Germans only produced about 6,000 Panther tanks and some 1,800 of the Tiger-I and Tiger-II.
Okay, so that's why it didn't make sense. He combined the Tiger-I and the Tiger-II. Even though those are totally separated vehicles, he put them together. And as far as I know, there was produced more than 6,000 Panther tanks. My research shows that the Germans had in total 21,000 tanks. That includes Beutepanzer, confiscations, Skoda tanks, and regular Panzers from 1 to 8, including the 8 one. I encountered that one. I don't include paper projects, but yeah, again, there was just 0 produced, so I kind of do. But sure, that's besides the point. I just thought he got something wrong there.
As for the Elefant, roughly 90 were made. The Russians operated on a completely different scale.
The Russians made somewhere between 65,000 and 85,000 T-34s.
They made exactly 84,400, I believe, of them.
They don't know. They lost count.
They do know.
The Russian T-34 is nowhere near as technically as good as the German tanks in terms of firepower armor.
That depends on which tank you're comparing it to exactly.
But on the other hand, there's thousands of them. That makes all the difference between victory and defeat in World War II.
True.
It rolls on tracks and boasts a mighty gun, but the Elefant is not technically a tank.
This does not have...
You hear that? They got it right. It's not a tank. Fucking congratulations. Then there of course are people who would argue that it's a tank variant and thus a tank, but, well, no. It's a self-propelled anti-tank gun, so that's the specifications. If you just call it an AFV, armored fighting vehicle, then you're within the barrier, always. That's like just calling a person a human rather than specify if they're Asian, white, Caucasian, black, or the other races.
Thus it's a self-propelled anti-tank gun or an assault gun.
Those are not exactly the same, but sure.
Today, the U.S. Army uses its own version of a self-propelled gun. This is the M109 Paladin howitzer. At 25 metric tons, it weighs less than half as much as the Elefant. The Elefant and the Paladin are designed to engage the enemy from as far away as possible.
If you go back as far as World War I and before, the aim of the field artillery was pretty much just to put a lot of high explosive downrange and pretty much obliterate anything that was down there. Now in the modern battlefield, we've taken into consideration collateral damage a lot more, and our munitions are incredibly more accurate than they used to be, even as far as 20 years ago.
Fort Hood, Texas. The U.S. Army is training artillery crews to destroy targets that are completely out of sight.
Well, that's how indirect bombardment works, but sure. Make it sound amazing like no one knew it. Well, you're comparing what looks to me like a 155 gun to an 88mm gun. Of course it pales. But what happens if you shoot the Paladin with anything that's armor penetrating? Just asking.
Elefant used an 88mm gun, which had an effective range of about 2,000 meters.
That is in direct engagement. That is not an indirect engagement.
The M109 can hit targets in another country.
Yeah, if you park it right next to the border, you wouldn't have that problem at all.
Fire the Excalibur round from over 20 kilometers away, and we can hit targets with as much accuracy as pinpointing a room in a house that we want to put the round into.
At what range exactly? You know, like, it's kind of a linear function. The further away the target, the more inaccurate it becomes. But sure, in modern times we have all sort of GPS-guided rounds and such.
And one mission, I fired over 300 rounds one night from 2 different locations at targets that were within 400 meters of friendly troops. That's what we like to call danger close.
The modern artillery battery is a highly complex communication rig that relies on muscle, brains, and razor-sharp eyes.
Oh my god, this section is actually boring, but they want to make it look exciting.
Any artillery is only as good
the observers locking in on targets. For artillery, we prefer human eyes on target. A lot of things can happen over time, and making those decisions, we need an observer on the ground. They're not actually spying the enemy, and they call us spy directions. They let us know where they are. And once we have that information, we take that information and we keep firing that and send it to our guns, which is referred to as the muscle of the artillery. The big thing about fires, we've got ships battlefield, we can attack them. The rest of the force, they're up. In combat, we're using against our ships in the open.
You know, they are comparing a modern field artillery, or mobile artillery if you want, to a self-prepared anti-tank gun that's supposed to engage in direct combat. It's kind of a vague and pale comparison if you ask me. If they should compare this thing, the Paladin I believe they call it, to anything, then they should compare it to... Let me just have a look. They could compare it to, for instance, the Hummel 15cm artillery piece. That would be a much more fair comparison because that's also the same intended role. And it runs almost 42 kilometers per hour. It has 12.5 PS per ton, and it has a matching gun. And that gun has a range of above 12 kilometers. So when you actually take a comparable vehicle to this Paladin, I'm actually not even that surprised. It's not even that good. They're just making it look good by taking the wrong vehicle and make the comparison to it. I mean, like, even the Elefant was able to lob a shell about 6 kilometers at full elevation. So you're really just being dumb here. Holy shit, I'm glad that's over. That was like, what? That's... yeah. Pretty much 4 minutes of just talking about an incorrect and incompatible vehicle. Good job, whoever made this back then.
Back at the Ordnance Museum, the team has finally wrenched out the rusted pins.
One of the largest ones we've done. We've done an M1 earlier when I was here, but this is one of the larger ones.
Built to handle the barbed wire and trenches of World War I, tracks remain a defining feature of the modern tank.
Actually, tanks were just able to do it. They were actually produced and built and invented to deal with horse tractor and getting stuck in mud. But sure, let's just say barbed wire and you get your point.
At the JSMC plant in Lima, Ohio, these tracks are being manufactured for the U.S. Army's main battle tank, the M1 Abrams.
And the fun fact is, modern barbed wire can defeat a tank. You just have to pile enough of it.
Just over 16 meters long, these tracks weigh roughly 200 metric tons each. The Abrams...
Let me just hear that again. What did you say?
Manufactured for the U.S. Army's main battle tank, the M1 Abrams. Just over 16 meters long, these tracks weigh roughly 200 metric tons each.
200 metric tons? Let me just give you a little hint here. The entire M1 Abrams tank weighs 71 tons. Metric tons, by the way, in case there's some other stupid tons out there. And you're telling me the tracks alone weighs 200 tons. Does anyone else than me see the issue here? It would make sense if they said 2 tons, but 200 tons.
The Abrams tracks need to be able to handle its top speed of 30 miles per hour in a variety of conditions.
What? Only 30 miles? I thought it was like 40 or something. Let me just check. M1 Abrams tank. I'll just take the Danish wiki. Shouldn't matter that much. That's 67 kilometers per hour. 67 divided by 1.6. It was 40. I was right, they were wrong. But okay, they'll get their point and we can move on. We're only halfway through. Not even.
These water hoses are not your usual garden variety. They
Well,
tear off.
that's a fucking basic observation, dickhead.
These water hoses are not your usual garden variety. They tear off more than just old paint.
It'll cut right through concrete. It'll chew anything up, including your body. Unfortunately, it got a little too close to me, and I lost part of my foot. A couple skin grafts later, they were able to put my heel back together.
So, nothing about telling us which pressure we're actually talking about here. I mean, like, if you're right in front of the nozzle, it will kill you. If you are maybe half a meter away, it won't. What's the pressure here at the muzzle? They don't tell us, they just show us a fucking water hose.
As Joe says, you dance with it. And once you get the dancing down, it goes along real easy.
As this elephant's history of dirt is washed clean, thousands of miles away in England, her dreaded enemy is alive and well.
I think there are more of her enemies in Russia, but okay.
This is a restored T-34.
85. T-34-85, thank you for getting the specifications right.
For many military historians, one of the greatest tanks of all time.
Don't ever say that. You just start a fight in the comment section if you say the greatest tank of all time. But you can say it was one of them.
The best tank in World War II has got to be the T-34.
I can hear people scream somewhere in the distance. It's not. Oh boy, my ears are bleeding.
The T-34 was the tank of World War II. And the reason is it was a revolutionary step forward in the holy trinity of tank design. The holy trinity is armor, firepower, and mobility.
The T-34 weighed 29.2 tons, exactly half that of the Elefant.
Well, you didn't specify, but yeah, the T-34-76 weighs 29.2 tons, thank you very much. And judging by that gun and everything, this is also an early model, maybe the 1940 model.
It was comparatively lightly armored, but carried a respectable 76.2mm tank gun. Its 12-cylinder diesel engine put out 500 horsepower, giving it a top speed of over 50 kilometers per hour.
I wouldn't call 34 of, what is it? 45 millimeters of armor. I won't really call that thin, but yeah. They're probably going to talk about the sloped armor in a second.
And a range almost 5 times that of the Elefant cross-country.
When the T-34 appeared, the Germans were shocked. Just shocked that the Russians had this vehicle. It was so good.
Well, they were shocked that the enemy had a tank that was able to kill tanks while they still had Panzer IIIs with 37mm guns. But sure, that's besides the point.
You could find tanks that had as much armor, you could find tanks that had as much firepower, you could find tanks that were as mobile. But you couldn't find any tanks that blended all 3 critical values.
The T-34 wasn't necessarily the easiest tank to work on.
It was horrible to work on, but sure.
But at the time, tanks weren't expected to have a life expectancy more than a few weeks, so the chances of an engine blowing up and needing fixing weren't as high as the tank being knocked out completely. Just reading accounts of what the Germans thought of it during the war and the terror that it obviously caused them at the time makes you want to find out more about the tank, and that's basically what got me interested in the first place. Something incredibly sexy about driving a T-34 and thinking about some of the crew that used to have to drive it during the war. This is the real thing, yeah.
That's a very, very interesting combination of words you just said. Something sexy about the T-34. Really? You're changing gears with a fucking hammer. Where are we now?
It is now week 3 of the 5-week Elefant restoration.
And they're not even
tackles
halfway
the
through.
massive wheels on the Elefant. Each side has 6 road wheels, 1 idler, and 1 drive wheel. Each road wheel weighs about 113 kilos.
I like the fact that they do metric stuff half the time, but they only do it half the time. They kind of, then it's Imperial, then it's metric, then it's Imperial. What the fuck is wrong with these guys? Please don't mix them. One is respectable, the other is for people who like foot fetishes.
And yes, getting them off is as hard as it looks.
Those road wheels, sometimes they have a mind of their own, and you get them on the shop floor and you turn your back and it'll just start moving, and the next thing you know, it's on the back of your leg. And you know, Leroy had an incident where one almost got on him, but luckily it fell the other way.
Stripped of her wheels, the Elefant is now ready to be drained of her toxic fluids.
They didn't do that before they took it into the workshop, just saying. But okay.
This means getting low down and working underneath tons of rusted steel.
Once these tanks are put in place to be put on display, they don't want a whole lot of oil and grease and all that leaking out of them to contaminate the soil.
Yeah, okay. My mistake. That is of course true. My mistake.
Still contain other leftovers even more toxic than old oil.
We have to check and see if the gauges in them have tritium in them, so they do a radioactive check and make sure there's no chemicals or anything like that in the paint.
Okay, I would more be worried about asbestos being used for cover like in Japanese tanks, but sure. I mean, like, that is totally viable. This tank saw service in Italy. This SPATG saw service in Italy. My mistake.
Yeah, if you were scared, you'd get hurt. That's what happens most of the time.
No, you get hurt if you fuck up, but yeah, sure, those two things kind of go along, I suppose.
What's on top of there?
Years.
Do the fake one.
What just happened?
I owe somebody something. That's all right, I'll catch a live one and give it to you.
There is no time for fun and games. The boys are on a deadline.
There's no time for fun games and we just heard all that. Interesting combination.
That's how he keeps us working, man. We got evidence now. No, we're talking about that right there.
The cattle prod.
That's what he walks around and gets us with. Now we got you.
If they don't do what they're told.
Seriously. No fun for playing games, but what the fuck is he doing?
Guaranteed they won't do it again.
Hurts like hell.
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
look at the marks all over our necks and stuff. Look. Okay. I got movement everywhere.
Water coming out of this one too.
Got it?
Yeah.
There's you some oil.
Yeah, it's mixture of oil and water.
You don't drain like that for days.
Drained of her toxic fluids, the Elefant is ready for another blast from the high-pressure hose.
Didn't we just see him clean off, the entire external side of the hull earlier? With that hose? Alright then, there's still paint on it for some reason.
She was built to be a nightmare on tracks. But
no, she was built on a failed project.
On the battlefield in action, all her flaws were quickly revealed. Even her strengths turned into deadly weaknesses.
It's armored up. I mean, this thing is armored up against most anything. So it protected the crew very well. It has a great gun on it. So it has great firepower. The problem is mobility.
And reliability, but that's not in the triangle, so yeah, sure.
Because it was so big, this is 70-something tons combat loaded. It just couldn't move around the battlefield well at all.
And while the Elefant may have had a super gun to knock out T-34s, it had no machine gun to deal with smaller human targets.
That was the Ferdinand, yes. And actually it did have the Krummlauf on a Sturmgewehr, but that's besides the point.
Courageous Soviet troops could run up, throw on a Molotov cocktail, perhaps a sticky mine, disable or destroy the Elefant tank.
Another limitation, the Elefant did not have a turret, so the amazing gun could not swivel independently of the chassis.
And because the gun sits up there in that big superstructure, it has very limited traverse. You have to, in fact, turn the entire vehicle if you want to track a target. So if you have a Russian T-34 coming at you straight on, not a problem. But if they're coming around one side, you literally have to move the vehicle around.
This is where I question if that wouldn't be a problem, since it is diesel-electric, or petrol-electric, or benzin-electric drive, so it shouldn't really be that much of a problem to traverse a vehicle like this. But sure, that's besides the point.
The Elefant was not built to roam the battlefield. This big gun was meant to sit back and fire from great distances.
Directly, not indirectly.
concept of this vehicle is that they needed to shoot Russian tanks at long ranges.
Self-propelled tank destroyers like the Elefant tend to operate in what is known as direct mode. Direct mode means you have your enemy directly in view. They hit only what they can see.
The 88mm gun that's on this vehicle, in theory, can shoot about 4 kilometers. And actually, what you're looking at when you look through the scope of this thing at 4 kilometers and you put the crosshair covers the target at that point. So it's sort of guessing.
Let me just have that one more time just in case I didn't catch that right.
It can shoot about 4 kilometers. And actually, what you're looking at when you look through the scope of this thing at 4 kilometers and you put the crosshair covers the target at that point.
Oh, okay, my mistake.
So it's sort of guessing.
Well, you wouldn't really put the crosshair on at 4 kilometers, then you're not compensating for range. Yet again, if the gun is zeroed in at 4 kilometers range, I am wrong.
Like the Elefant, the Paladin is meant to engage the enemy.
Not this stupid Paladin. There is no comparison between the two vehicles. They do not fill the same roles of engagement.
From afar. But with the Paladin, there is no guesswork. The observers do the math, and the gunners deliver the payload. The target doesn't stand a chance. Unlike the Elefant, the M109 howitzer fires in the indirect mode, which means it does not directly see its target.
And now they are confirming the fact that they shouldn't do this comparison, but they do.
To complete the equation, gun crews need to be able to communicate with each other.
4400 out.
One of the most accurate and lethal guns in the world, the M109 is built on a connective web of information.
There are eyes, the eyes of the field artillery. They're out actually spotting the enemy, and they call us, the Fire Direction Center, and they let us know where they are. And once we have that information, we take that information and compute firing data and send it to our guns, which we like to refer to as the muscle of the field artillery.
You just said that the other time. Why are we still stuck with those guys?
When the Elefant made it to the U.S. Ordnance Museum, she came as is. No backup parts, no spares.
That's also pretty much how they were deployed, but okay.
They're locked up. That's why it was so hard to move around. It's like having the brakes on.
When the boys wrench free the damaged sprocket, they discover 2 pieces of shrapnel. 2 pieces that will help reveal the mystery of what brought this Elefant down.
Transmission.
Well, as Joe and the rest of the crew were trying to put the sprocket back on the left side of the Elefant, well, that's when they discovered these 2 fragments.
At first, the museum team is puzzled. Could they belong to the Elefant?
Doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter if they belong to the Elefant or anything else. The fact is that the transmission is knocked out. And by transmission, I do include sprocket wheels, because this is a diesel electric drive. So it doesn't really have your typical kind of mechanical transmission. It probably has, but it's kind of a, vague definition.
The fragments come from a round of ammunition. But who delivered the death blow?
The enemy. No more. No, nothing else. You don't need to know anything else. But sure, you can also turn it around and say you were in Italy, so probably an American, German, or similar. Whatever could go in the hills. Judging by the size of the round, or at least the fragments, it could have been a Churchill, a 6-pounder gun. Doesn't matter really, it was knocked out in Italy.
The tank destroyer was a disaster.
Yes, I told you.
Complex engineering was a major liability.
The majority of the losses weren't combat losses. The majority of the losses were the vehicle simply broke down, they couldn't be repaired, they were heavy, awkward design.
I told
2
you.
weeks of savage fighting end in Russian victory.
Yes.
The cost is horrific. It is estimated that 250,000 Soviet troops were killed, 600,000 wounded, 100,000 Germans were killed or wounded. Half the German tanks were knocked out of action. German forces began a long retreat to ultimate defeat. The flawed Ferdinand, those that survived, were sent back to the design table. Protective grills were placed over the engines. A commander's cupola was added to the turret. A non-conductive coating called Zimmerit was applied to the hull.
Really? They put a Zimmermate on the Elephants? I didn't know that.
This would make it more difficult for magnetic mines to stick on. Refitted, reworked, the Ferdinand was now renamed the Elefant. And in 1944, it was sent on its final mission.
The first company of the 653rd Elephant Battalion was rushed from the Nibelungen Works in Austria to the Italian front in order to counter the American and British invasion of the Antioch beachhead.
January 1943, the Italian campaign. The Allies wanted to break through heavily fortified German lines and reach Rome. They launched an amphibious assault, landing some 36,000 troops on the coastal town of Anzio, about 50 kilometers south of Rome. German forces were initially surprised but hit back hard. The death toll was massive.
Why are they showing footage from the Eastern Front when we're talking about the Italian front? Yet again, I just presume there isn't much footage from down there.
By the time the Italian campaign was over, the first company of the 653rd limped out of Italy with only 3 functioning vehicles. The others were lost to engine fires, P-40 attacks, disabling hits on the treads that they couldn't recover.
It was at Anzio that the Ordnance Museum's Elefant was hit in the left front wheel, but the mystery remains.
Left front wheel, yeah, okay, sprocket wheel, I guess that counts.
Who or what?
Well, we looked through our extensive ammo collection and found the M61, which is a perfect fit for this. Fits just right in there, that threading you can see.
This lets the team narrow in on which Allied ordnance took the Elefant out.
So this is essentially the type of round that took out our Elefant tank, or at least disabled it. There's a whole lot of different vehicles in the catalog of American tanks of 1944 that could have fired this. Might have been a Sherman, might have been an M10.
Now, was it shot at by other things? Probably so.
Might have been a Sherman, might have been an M10. That's not very accurate, as those two do not use the same gun. The Sherman uses the M3 L40 75, and the M10 uses the M176 L52, I believe it is. But of course there's a Sherman which uses the 76mm gun, but were they really that many, and were they active in Italy? I don't recall. Someone might be able to correct me about if there were 76mm Shermans in Italy. But those two rounds are not interchangeable. Those two guns are not the same at all. So it's either or neither.
But I think most of this damage on this vehicle was done by Sherman with the 75mm gun.
Once the Elefant was captured, it was identified by the technical intelligence team of the Ordnance Department as something to be exploited for its technical intelligence.
The Elefant's short-lived combat career was now over.
It wasn't really short. It saw service from 1942 to 44. Yet again, 2 years, but what else died in 2 years? What else lasted 2 years on a scrap project?
But right when you think the job is done, something can go terribly wrong.
There's my finger! There goes my paint job! Get it!
What is this? That's just a voiceover. What the fuck? None of those guys would have a microphone on them at that point.
Nobody was communicating. You've seen all the guys with their orange hats on. When he puts his hands up like that means everything stops, because he's in control.
It's not a good thing when it's only gone 25 or 30 feet, and all of a sudden you've got a scratch paint job.
Come on, Sarge. Hope it gets a little bit better than this. Quick. Firewood, baby. Give me that firewood.
That's not going to work.
They've got to control the tank, so wood blocks are shoved in to slow it down, but the tank ignores the wood.
And they're having trouble with the wheels because the chassis is designed to lift over obstruction in the track.
All this effort, and they haven't even got the Elefant onto the trailer. They still have to haul the 71-ton monster to the museum grounds.
I don't think that's going to go on there, Rich.
The Elefant weighs much more than the trailer she's clambering onto.
Yeah, but isn't the trailer designed for the M1 Abrahams, because those two vehicles weigh the same thing, almost. This one should even be lighter because it's not loaded with ammunition and oil and all the other excuses he came with earlier. There we go, that's a nice picture to end up on. So, this episode, it was nice, it was well on point, it actually did a good job in comparison to what I've seen out there. I've seen things that made me tear my fucking eyes out. I hated the comparison they made between the Elefant and what was it called? The Paladin. That's really, no, you're comparing two different types of vehicle on the same scale. It's not how it's supposed to be. You're defying the laws of tank combat or combat in general. But hey, this has been the Sd.Kfz Artillerist here, giving my input on this sort of video, whatever you might want to call it. If you like what I saw and want to see more, do subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, subscribe, all the other things. We'll see you in something else. Enjoy your day.